6 months later, the CEO wrote and said, the premises were tidy and well organized, the retail outlets were consistently well stocked. Conversation throughout the company had become about ideas and new opportunities, and staff morale remained high.
So good morning, everybody. My name is John Brooker and I'm hosting today's Global Chapter meeting. And I'm really delighted to have Jenny Clarke on with us today. I've known Jenny since, I think it was 2005, when you were one of the co-trainers with Mark and Paul on my first solution-focused course. So that ages me a bit, doesn't it? And really delighted. I love the way Jenny thinks. I love the way that she really pushes herself into things like singing when she found that difficult. And I love her grumpy old lady impersonations. Her grumpy rap is a joy. If you can ever find a bootleg video of her grumpy rap, it's a delight to watch. But Jenny, as all of those things, is also a master in solution focus. And she is going to talk to us today about best hopes and outcomes. And Jenny, welcome to your first SFIO Global Chapter speaking engagement. And it's all yours. I'll be quiet from now on. Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and John, for inviting me to do this. I must have thought for about 10 milliseconds about whether I wanted to do this or not. And I went to one of the fikas just to, get the feeling of what this community is in these strange times. And seeing all these faces on the screen made me then think, God, yes, I've got to do this. So thank you all for coming from the North and the South Hemisphere, from as far west as Canada and as far east as, I don't know which is Easter, Australia or Japan, but thank you all for coming. And you've come, I think, to hear me say a few things, to talk to each other. So I'm going to put a PowerPoint on. So I call this From Best Hopes to Platform, because I think I might get a bit grumpy, who knows, but I think there's a few things to be said about the phrases that we use. So I'm going to talk a bit about the phrase itself, best hopes, and what job that is doing. We're going to have a bit of one-to-one practice working, and then we'll have a short break, and then I'll talk about a real case working with a group. And of course, working with a group can be very, very different from working with one individual. So a little bit about how do you fulfill that best hopes function with a group of people who may well have very different best hopes. So that's what I'm going to be on about. Two things that I want to draw to your attention. Evan George from Brief beat me by about 2 or 3 weeks on this by posting a video on best hopes. And I highly recommend that video. It's about 15 minutes. You'll find it on the brief.org.uk website. And Evan talking about the Brief's view of best hopes, I think will be very helpful. I've done a couple of articles on the question of platform. So I'm going to present a different one today called Solution Focus in a Small Business. Yes, I haven't presented this before, but it is in the book that Kati Hankowski and Nati Polgar wrote. But it's deep within the book and people just might have missed it. Who knows? So if my internet connection goes down, this is where you can look for a lot of the material. Another thing about best hopes, those of you who read the SFT list will have seen Harry Corman introduce this word, Swedish word called, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but floshka. And he introduced this word, which he translated into English as buzzword, during a conversation on the list about microanalysis and specifically about co-construction. And people were talking about co-construction, and Harry Corman said, this is a floshka. It's a buzzword. And that made me think it's not the only buzzword in our canon. In the solution-focused word, we have a lot of jargon. And there's a very important place for jargon. When professionals are talking to each other, they kind of want to talk in shorthand. And we've got lots of shorthand words in the solution-focused word. Co-construction is the one that was being talked about here. Solution itself is a buzzword because in the solution-focused word, solution in English anyway, and all the other languages I've asked about, doesn't mean the same to a solution-focused practitioner as it would to somebody that I met on the street. We just got used to that. But I think both best hopes also comes into this category that solution-focused people use the phrase best hopes, but it's jargon. So I have a question for you in groups of about 4. What is the purpose of this question? What are your best hopes? And what does it do? So we'll give you about 5 minutes to talk about that and a couple of minutes afterwards to hear some of what you've said. Okay, we have time for a couple of you, if you would, to let me know what kind of conversations you had. I nearly said conclusions, that would be a bit ambitious.
Would anyone like to?
Can I? May I?
Aoki.
Yeah. Rather than saying goal, like Mark once said, goal is like gaol, like jail, but best hope is more free and more gentle way of asking positive future you want. That's.
Thank you, Aike-san. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, and we came up also with the translation of best hopes in different languages and what kind of difficulty it can make. For example, I know it from German. We translate it to kühnste Hoffnungen. And this question sometimes is pushing the people a little bit and is not so smooth and helpful. This is what I experience. And I don't remember what Gary said about French, but we had this discussion as well, having in mind the different, what is behind the translation of the word.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a conversation about what the function of the question is? What is it doing, that question? Ralph?
That was exactly, we also went there and said like the wording is not so important because it's about helping the people to arrive, to set out the tone of the conversation, to lead forward in thinking, and also to surprise them a little bit by such a question that is it's a bit awkward or new to the people, and so they start in a different direction.
Yeah. Very nice, thank you. As Ralph just said, there are other ways of describing this part of the solution-focused conversation. The UK SFP calls it contracting. In Sweden, Harry Corman and his colleagues call it a common project. Brief have used a metaphor of a gallery, walking through an art gallery and the various rooms in the art gallery. And Jackson and McCurgo call it the platform, which is why I'm calling it platform here. And one of our participants once said when we were training about the platform, you can't leave the platform until you have a ticket. And I think this idea of a ticket that Brief might use and we use is a sort of permission to continue. It's, we now know that we have a common project, something to talk about. And in fact, in Evan's video, he described it as giving us a way to talk. That we asked this question to give us a way to talk. And unlike many of the tools in the solution-focused toolbox, Best Hopes is not really a question, it's the beginning of a chunk of conversation. And I would describe that chunk of conversation as a way of setting up in a direction which seems amenable, agreeable to your clients. So the answer to the Best Hopes question isn't really contractual, and that's why I put it in inverted commas. We're not sitting there until the contract is fulfilled, but it sets a direction, gives us something to talk about. So there are other elements in this chunk of conversation. Okay, we get an answer about what the best hopes are, but actually we need to be fairly clear that this is something, we haven't just got a moaner in the room with us, not somebody who wants something to be different, but doesn't see it as any part of their job to do anything about it. And I often find myself on pronoun watch when I'm at work with a client. When do people stop talking about they should do something, he should do something? And when do they start talking about I or we? And we're looking for a project, something that people somebody not only wants something to be different, but also they're prepared to do something about it. And they might be prepared to do something about it because they can see what the benefits of doing something about it are and what difference it would make. And establishing the platform to this extent of finding somebody who wants something different and is willing to do something about it, because the difference that it will make is so attractive, can be a major part of any project, especially when you're working with groups. I found you can take half of the time doing this effort. But I want you to have a go now just one-to-one, which is so much easier, isn't it? And what's the time? I'll give you just 2 or 3 minutes each, because this is just a practice of a very nice little riff that I think we might have learned from Ben Furman, and certainly influenced by Insoo Kim Berg, you can see that. So a quick story about what is so dreadful about the moment. And the practitioner says, oh, this is tough, isn't it? And then let's try and guess. This is a time when a solution-focused person is allowed to guess. So you want. Now, you can guess completely wrongly. And the advantage of guessing completely wrongly is that your client, let's call them client, your client will say, no, that's not what I want so-and-so. So bad guesses are allowed. You may not have time to get to that enthusiastic response. Yes, that's what I want. But ask about the benefits of getting this tough situation. Okay, everybody, how did you get on? Anybody get any enthusiastic platforms built? Oh, hello, I've just seen you. Hello.
Yes, yes, it's Iska here. I had a lovely conversation with Peter, and in fact, we built a joint platform on how can you, at the very beginning of these virtual conversations, what can we do to create trust and knowing each other? So it seems that we need more time when we talk virtually to each other, so that we're not in a show. So we built that platform on, okay, how could we do that in future? Because we will need it for the coming months. So we had the joint platform.
Yes, we could be in this situation for some time, couldn't we?
Other people? Jesper, I saw you nodding when Jenny was asking the question. If I can put the spotlight on you.
Thank you. No, we were just out with Alex. We talked about a bit forth and back, actually without knowing it. Started building up a platform in some other context. We were talking about sound on audio on Zoom and what were the best hopes for that, especially Alex as a musician. It was quite good. No, just building up a platform, looking around. Where's the enthusiasm? Actually, I think that was the main point in our conversation, to figure out what are we attracted about in the conversation right now. And all of a sudden, it seems to be the audio on Zoom, but it led to a very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Jesper. And that phrase, where is the enthusiasm? We'll come to that, I think, in the second half, because when we're working with a group, it's much more challenging, let's say, to find the enthusiasm and work with it. And we'll talk about that a bit in the second half. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the concept of best hopes as a chunk of conversation. Kati said on the chat, it's about negotiating direction. And I think this is I want to quote Evan again from his video, when he's talking about the status, as he called it, of the client's answer to a form of best hopes question. He says, this has nothing to do with goals, which is why I don't like the word contracting for it. It's nothing to do with goals. Anything, and he stresses the word anything, that makes things better for the client is verification of change and is worth noticing and amplifying. So it really doesn't need to be connected with the best hopes as originally formulated at all. Just that anything that makes things better is worth going on to. So this idea of, Kati said, direction, Evan makes a big point of this, that the best hopes is a starting point. It's not contractual, but directional. I remember saying this myself once, and Mark liked it so much that we made a poster of it. The miracle is not the destination. We're just setting directions. And I think to get too hung up on the answer to the best hopes question can slow us down and not be helpful. So that's my sort of current feelings about best hopes. The phrase itself, by the way, I don't like. And I don't know if this is because most of my life and most of my experience, I've been working in groups and having meetings with groups and being a member of a group. If anybody asked me when I was at a meeting at work, what were my best hopes for this meeting, I would have said, I hope there are biscuits with the coffee when it comes. I mean, unless you've got a context, I don't know what the question means. So I don't use the phrase. I find another way of establishing the direction that we want to usefully be going in. This is what I had said about the client. And I'd got to the stage of saying that now they had a bigger factory, they had 3 shops and lots of wholesale customers. And their systems that they had started way back 18 months ago with just the 2 of them really didn't work. That was a sort of post-it note to-do list. Wasn't working anymore. To-do lists falling off walls all over the place, that kind of thing. So the CEO, who was a friend of ours, the brother of the artist, by the way, asked us to come and, quote, do some SF training for 2 days. Do some SF training. There's the invitation. What would you do with an invitation like that? What would you do in conversation with him? What would you do before the actual event? And how would you get started with a group? Really enthusiastic CEO here. He was going to get all 30 of them into a room for the best part of 2 days to, quote, have some SF training. So, in groups of, again, John, please, about 4. What did you discover? What happened in your conversations?
For me, a lot of learning from others or co-creating.
And what would be one of those things that you learned, Sylvia? I can see Jenny's
well, in a way, from others who have better practice, another 2 colleagues, or more practice, the buy-in as a second step, to have people motivated in the team. So to go for seeing what could be their benefit from this conversation as a second step. I think that was something that I had on my mind, but just keep forgetting. Mm-hmm. It really reminded me. Yeah.
Jenny, I'll hand back to you for hosting now.
Okay.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
What else? Favorite question?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think the questions are easy. It's the number of people in the organization that they ask the question to beforehand. Asking the CEO is really important, but you couldn't ask all of the people in that team because there's too many of them. But if you got some of the key players, and including some of the outliers, it would begin the change before you make the change. They make the change.
Yeah, great, Alan. And the CEO will have some good ideas about who those few people might be. And I like your outliers idea too, not just the yes men.
I call them grumpies.
Yeah, there's always a room for us. Because, you see, it's true, the grumpy ones are the ones that care. That's why they're grumpy.
My line is, give me your grumpies.
Yeah. Yes, but did you want to speak? Or?
I think with so many people, in the organization, one-on-one conversations about what they want from this particular workshop that the CEO wanted. It's also possible to send out by email a short questionnaire asking some questions from the whole team, and then you work through their answers and you look for common ground between them and the CEO, and then you go back to the CEO beforehand and say, well, this is the common ground. Is this enough to work with to obtain your goals? And from that you go forward.
Very nice. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I always go for the best hopes for the CEO. So you have an idea on this, and what would tell you 3 months after the 2-day training that it was worthwhile? 2 days is a lot of time to take out people and blah blah blah. And I learned it the hard way from when I was younger. Just go for that and then do the training, and you were sitting there with staff members saying, "What the hell are we doing?" And then learned it to ask. I wouldn't do questionnaires. I don't believe that much in that because many people ignore it or don't take it that serious. But I more ask, like, say, can you give me 2, 3, 4 people in this group that will attend that you think represent the group, and may I call them up? And I would do the same. So we are going to have this training. You know, the context you were talking about, Jenny. We are having this training. It's 2 days. The purpose of it is that you will be better in whatever it is. So what are your best hopes for that? What will tell you that these 2 days, again, was well spent, and they will maybe address some topics that the CEO didn't address. And at the same time, for me, I actually get a series of criteria for success that I can tick off or say, no, I'm not going to training under these circumstances.
Yeah, thank you. What we're hearing from all of these contributions is that it takes time, and the platform building thing can take time before the event. And the bigger the group, the more time that it's worth spending before the event. Time for one more if anybody wants to, and of course the chat is available. What we complain about is what we care about, exactly, Rob. Yeah.
I'll say something, Jenny.
Thank you.
I love the idea that Jerry said, which is he gets the CEO to send the invitation to people about the event. So, you know, being the host of the event, that goes out from the CEO. And I thought that was a lovely idea. And he would help carve that email out with the CEO before, and then send something out afterwards about what the event will be about. And yeah, I just thought that was a lovely reminder of who's hosting this. Is it the CEO or the trainer? Yeah.
And I don't know if it's useful to mention this, but I hear very much the word training, and I surely would not do a training, but maybe I would call it training. And I guess we are in a very a pleasant place with solution focus, that we don't need to analyze the idea of what did the client want. If he said training, and do we do training? No, I only do coaching stuff. But I think it's worth checking as well, or at least give some ideas in what way I will work with the group, if it fits with the ideas they wanted, just because of this word.
Thank you, Kathy. So here we are, Kathy. We don't do training, and I think it's a lazy invitation. Come and give us some training. So we don't do training. So that first conversation with the CEO was some of the things that you've been saying. What difference do you want this to make? We'll only, quote, give them a toolkit, do some training if we can work on important things as part of the process. And indeed, in the 2 days that we had with them, the first day was working on something important. And the second day we unpacked, well, what did we do and how did we do that? So that was a very important thing. This doing training, I think, as I just said, is a lazy thing. And anybody remember the pirates, by the way? There was a beautiful pirate sketch where the pirates were having a mutiny, and they said, what we need is a training day. And I think a training day is just seen as either a treat, which it rarely is, or something better to do. Anyway, that's the
beginning of a wish.
Yeah.
It's a beginning of a wish of the client.
Yes, it's the beginning of something, exactly. And then, yeah, and what difference do they hope that will make? So we got some reasonable ideas from the CEO about what difference that it would make. And interesting enough, we sent the invitation. I dare say the CEO did as well, but we sent quite a detailed one, telling them what to expect, who to contact, and in particular, what achievements they were proud of that they had done at work, and what challenges they were facing at work. And this was in December, and there was going to be a Christmas party at the end, which was deemed to be a good reward. But these two things, what achievements they were proud of and what challenges they were facing at work, were very important things that they were asked to think about beforehand. By the way, we always give people contact details, and I don't think that more than 1 in 1,000 have ever followed up that invitation. They don't, but it's just nice to say you can if you want to. Now, when we got there, 30 people are going to pack into this fairly small room. We got there early, we prepared the space as you all did, getting the chairs basically out of the room. And we started by getting everybody's voice in the room. Everybody, although there were 30 of them, you can take a little bit of time to just say what your name is and what your role is in the organization. Because remember, some of them were working in shops all over the county, and most of them were working in the factory, but not all. We set up an Oscar ceremony, and I think this is a lovely ritual to go through with a large group. Everybody picked a name at random from a hat, and the instructions were, watch this person carefully for the 2 days that we're going to be together, because at the end of it, you're going to award this person with an Oscar, a prize for something. It might be a prize for the person who came up with the most ideas, the person who knew when we needed a break, the person who always noticed something happening. So everybody was told to keep their eyes on somebody secretly, so that at the end they could give them a prize. And that ceremony at the end is a really nice way anyway of ending up. I know a few of you do this. And then everybody spent some time making a poster for themselves, listing the achievements that they were proud of and listing their challenges at work. And this takes some time, of course. And then all the posters are put up on the walls, and everybody walks around and looks at the various challenges that are facing people. And with some kind, I think we use dots. People sort of dot the challenges that they are particularly interested in. And it ends up with a list of 4 issues that people are particularly interested in. And they're things like stock control. They're things like tidying up the place and putting things where they belong. They're things like that. And then we just formed them into groups of 4 or 5, and the only instruction was work on the issue that you're most interested in. The one that Jesper said earlier, the one where most of your enthusiasm is. And that was setting up the platform, going back a bit. That was setting up the platform, and that took all morning. This platform is emergent. We never asked at this time, what are your best hopes? We just developed a list of challenges, and we worked on which of those had priority and had the most energy behind them, and people chose for themselves where to work. And for the rest of the afternoon, we used Oscar. I don't know how many of you know Oscar. There it is. Looking at outcome, it's not a very good word, as I said earlier, but it fits the mnemonic. So which direction are we going? What do we want? And we want things like better stock control. So it's fairly, not particularly well defined. We use the scale. For this working in groups, we have K, know-how, which is a sort of mixture of resources. They're personal resources, but they're also resources available in the whole organization or even elsewhere. Who else does this kind of thing? What do they know that we might be able to learn? The A in Oscar does a lot of work. It's about affirming, hooray, well done, and it's about action. And this is very important that we stick to that. What's the next small step towards the outcome that we're looking for? And then, of course, this is an iterative process, and we're going to review it. The definition of outcome may change a little bit, and so on. So that's what we spent most of the second day unpacking this and teaching them the tools, having already actually worked on real issues, 4 real issues with them. Here they are at work, and you can see it's not a particularly big room. And I should say a bit more about these people than I did at the beginning. You can see them, they're mostly young, he's not, but they're mostly young. And these are people who had left school at the age of 15 or 16, who had probably never been in a training room before. The idea of anything that smacked of learning or training wasn't particularly, they didn't particularly look forward to. And so it was very important that this room and the space didn't look like a classroom, that they had time and the ability to move around, to do what they wanted to draw pictures, to put things on the walls, to stand where they wanted to and who they wanted to. And I think that the way that this room looks is a really important look. They're lying on the floor, there were some big cushions. It was a very, even though it was a very crowded room, it felt good. What happened afterwards, the training, as I call it, there's a nice quote from him. I write from a transformed factory, both physically and mentally. All of the staff said how useful they had found the training. Still using that word, notice. Indeed, a number of people were keen to get to work on Monday, and that was most disturbing. And there was a long list of specific small steps towards improvements, and the one that we really liked was, let's call our meeting room the solutions room. That's the end of the presentation. I'd love to hear what you think about it, what your comments are, what you would have done, all of that.
Jenny, you've got a couple of questions in the chat room which would be good to answer. Do you introduce the Oscar concept to the groups?
Yes, on day 2. Day 2 was spent entirely going through the Oscar process. So remember, we did this yesterday, this is what we were doing. So day 2 was a training day. But having already had that experience of having the model, let's call it a model, the model used. So yes, it was made explicit the next day, but not while we were doing the work. 6 months later, the CEO wrote and said, the premises were tidy and well organized, the retail outlets were consistently well stocked. Conversation throughout the company had become about ideas and new opportunities, and staff morale remained high. And we went back a year later for a review session, and they were still saying the same thing. And we had another great Christmas party. And this is where I had one of those beginner's luck things. We went 10-pin bowling, and the very first ball that I threw knocked all the pins down. Correct. What other questions there? Did we introduce it? Yes, we did, but not as we were going along. We did it the next day. What would you say was the first important thing that worked? I think the first important thing was, well, perhaps the invitation letter, but actually the beginning of being there with, as I said, these people who had left school because they didn't like sitting in chairs being told things by older people. So I think the most important thing was to make the room not look like a classroom, to get everybody speaking and to get everybody demonstrating, particularly their achievements, what they were proud of. And that probably took the best part of an hour, but I think that was the most important thing, to make people think, oh, this isn't so bad. I can stand 2 days of this. I think nowadays, this is probably 10 years ago, I don't think we would do a 2-day course anymore. But, you know. Mm-hmm. And if we did, it would be 2 days separated by a month, something like that.
And one more question, Jenny, before we finish. How do you keep the groups SF and have them work with scaling know-how, etc., before introducing Oscar?
Oh, because that's what's so great about SF, especially with people who aren't trammelled with any management theories or anything like that. They just answer the questions. What would you give it on a scale of, I like naught? What would you give it on a scale of 0 to 10? I'll tell you. 4. Oh, what makes it a size that? Well, I'll tell you. It's the people who think that you should be asking other questions that it's the most difficult with. I think, these mostly young people just obediently answer the question. So keeping them doing it afterwards, for a long time might be more difficult, but that's why I was so pleased that we called their staff room the solutions room, because they would know when we're a bit stuck, let's adjourn to this room. And I dare say that the Oscar posters were around there, and see what we can do. So that helped, visuals helped to keep them SF. But the initial thing, they just do. People are very compliant mostly. Answer this question and they do. The people who don't are maybe people like me who want to say, why are you asking me that question? Most people aren't usually as difficult as that.
All right, so we're coming up to near the end now, Jenny. So what I'd like to do is say a huge thank you to Jenny for providing us with wisdom from her interaction with that small company. And I love the idea of Jenny of calling the staff room the solution room, just as a symbol almost of things have changed in just a tiny way. And really would like to go round those who are participating at the moment and just ask you to provide a small piece of feedback to Jenny in appreciation. So in a good solution-focused way. And I know some of our speakers find this quite difficult, but if you could just give some appreciation for Jenny, that would be much appreciated. And if you didn't understand my question, it's in the chat. And someone just fell over. I'm not sure what happened there. All right, so please, would you like to, someone like to start?
Thank you, Jenny. It was amazing how clearly you took me through a very constructive process of learning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm impressed about several things and would like just to mention little things. One is how much taking these people seriously is in the invitation and giving them a detailed preview of what will happen. I think it makes, you call it, makes a really good platform for act as serious people. And I forgot the other ones. Maybe this is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. It is an emergent platform. You see that, but it's sort of happening gradually.
Thank you, Kathy.
I echo somewhat with Kathy, and I thought not just a small things, but as a whole, I think everybody felt valued, and I think that was turned into the positive power for the company. The way you treated the whole process, caring about each person being included and valued, I thought that was very important.
Arigato.
I think what I appreciated from your presentation, Jenny, is the amount of time you spent on the platform building. I think we too easily move away from that sometimes to a preferred future. But the platform is like the foundation of a house. If that's not properly built, the walls you build onto that will collapse in time. And spending a whole morning just on that, I think it's amazing, and it was of invaluable meaning to me in the work I do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the sunshine, or if it's dark where you are, sleep well.